right, I think you can start.
Oh.
All right, I'm gonna go upstairs. I got some homework to do.
Sounds good. Thank you. So I wanted to give Bhante a night off. And so there was a sutra I was going to give for one of the retreat days. But that retreat, there was not too many adults. So I only got to give a talk to the kids. And so I can use the sutra to give it to you guys today. It's from the Samyutta Nikaya. And it's called the Vakkali Sutta. Vakkali.
Do you know which number?
Yes, it is. It's in the book, in the Khanda Samyutta section, number 87. It should be called the Vakkali Sutta. The Khanda Samyutta is number 22, and then the sutra within the Khanda Samyutta is it's number 87.
Okay, yeah, fine.
So Vakkali was a bhikkhu, and we all know bhikkhu is a disciple of the Buddha, a monk. And this sutra talks about, it has a famous saying that the Buddha used in this, and we'll go over it, what implications that saying has. So it starts off, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Rahagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. Now, on that occasion, the Venerable Vakkali was dwelling in the potter's shed, sick, afflicted, and gravely ill. Then the Venerable Vakkali addressed his attendants. Come, friends, please approach the Blessed One. Pay homage to him in my name with your head at his feet and say this. Venerable Sir, the Bhikkhu Vakkali is sick, afflicted, gravely ill. He pays homage to the Blessed One with his head at his feet. Then say this. It would be good, Venerable Sir, if the Blessed One would approach the Bhikkhu Vakkali out of compassion. Yes, friend, those bhikkhus replied, and they approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and delivered their message. The Blessed One consented by silence. Then the Blessed One dressed, and taking bowl and robe, approached the Venerable Vakkali. The Venerable Vakkali saw the Blessed One coming in the distance and stirred on his bed. The Blessed One said to him, Enough, Vakkali, do not stir on your bed. There are these seats ready. I will sit down there. So he saw the Buddha coming. He wanted to get up and greet him, but he's sick. So the Buddha told him just to stay in his bed. Their seats are ready. I'll sit down. Then the Buddha then sat down on the appointed seat and said to the Venerable Vakkali, I hope you are bearing up, Vakkali. I hope you are getting better. I hope that your painful feelings are subsiding and not increasing, and that their subsiding, not their increase, is to be discerned. Venerable Sir, I am not bearing up. I am not getting better. Strong painful feelings are increasing in me, not subsiding, and their increase, not their subsiding, is to be discerned. I hope then, Vakkali, that you are not troubled by remorse and regret. And Vakkali said, Indeed, Venerable, I have quite a lot of remorse and regret. Well, I hope, Vakkali, that you have nothing for which to reproach yourself in regard to virtue and behavior. I have nothing, Venerable Sir, for which I reproach myself in regard to virtue and behavior. Then, Vakkali, if you have nothing for which to reproach yourself in regard to virtue and behavior, why are you troubled by remorse and regret? And he says, For a long time, Venerable Sir, I have wanted to come and see the Blessed One, but I haven't been fit or healthy enough to do so. Enough, Vakkali. Why do you want to see this decaying body? One who sees the Dhamma sees me. One who sees me sees the Dhamma. For in seeing the Dhamma, Vakkali, one sees me, and in seeing me, one sees the Dhamma. So that's like a famous saying in the Buddha, one who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha, one who sees the Buddha sees the Dhamma. And I actually heard Bhante Kalita once here in meditation. There was a meditator, and she said that she loves to sit in front of Bhante Kalita. And Bhante Kalita mentioned this story to her. It said, even the Buddha said, what's the point in seeing this decaying body? It's a big deal. And so he's saying that what you see is just a decaying body. Not by seeing the body do you see the Buddha, but by seeing the Dhamma, you see the Buddha. So let's see what he means. He goes, what do you think, Vakkali? Are images permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, sir. Is what is impermanent suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent suffering and subject to change fit to be regarded like this? This is mine, this I am, this is myself? No, Venerable Sir. Is feeling permanent or impermanent? Is sensation permanent or impermanent? Is construction permanent or impermanent? Is perception permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent suffering and subject to change fit to be regarded like this? This is mine, this I am, this is myself? No, Venerable Sir. Therefore, Vakkali, any kind of image whatsoever, whether past, future, or present, subjective or objective, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all images should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Any kind of feeling whatsoever, any kind of sensation whatsoever, any kind of construction whatsoever, any kind of perception whatsoever, whether past, future, or present, subjective or objective, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all perception should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Seeing thus, Vakkali, the well-instructed noble one experiences disenchantment with images. Disenchantment towards feelings, disenchantment towards sensation, disenchantment towards constructions, disenchantment towards perception. Experiencing disenchantment, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge, it is liberated. He understands, birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming into any state of existence. Then the Blessed One, having given this exhortation to the Venerable Vakkali, rose from his seat and departed for Mount Vulture Peak. So here he's touching upon what is called the 5 aggregates, the 5 constituents. And what are these constituents? These are the constituents to the process of perception. So if we go to any psychology class in a community college or a big university, they're going to talk about how we are organisms in an environment. So when you were born with the 5 senses: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body. And these 5 senses get stimulated by the environment. So the eye, light falls on the eye, hits the retina in the back of the eye. That retina converts that electromagnetic wave into a message that gets sent up to the brain like a telephone wire. Vibrations get detected by the ear. and the hairs start vibrating and turn that vibration into an electrochemical signal. The tongue tastes chemicals. The body has nerve receptors. All these types of nerves convert energy into messages that get sent up to the brain. Once it gets to the brain starts to construct an image using these sensations. And once there's an image constructed, there is what is called perception. Hearing, seeing, tasting, touching. Once there is perception, the whole cortex, the whole outer bark of the brain starts to construct and interpret what it is perceiving. So here the Buddha is saying, he's talking about the 5 constituents of perception, which is the image, the feeling, the sensation, the construction, and the perception. There's Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, and Vijnana. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
So, when we open our eyes, we see only color. So, have you guys ever seen a white canvas for a painter? And he has his little plate of different colors. He'll touch it and start painting this white canvas, right? What is he doing to the canvas? He's putting color to this blank canvas, right? A little red, a little blue, a little black, a little yellow. Out of these colors he's just using, it's just color. He constructs it in a certain way that when we look at it, we see an image. We don't see just color. We'll see a person at the beach that he drew and painted. This is the same way when we are opening our eyes. We don't see objects, we're just seeing color. And this color is the sensation, the sanya. Only when we take different colors and start constructing and processing, the mind starts processing, the brain, the nervous system, will take these colors and put them together and construct the image in the same way the painter did. Except your brain, the activity of the brain is doing it faster than you can even comprehend. You're unconscious of this process. So by the time you interpret what's happening, you already say, oh, that's Fred, that's Dave, this is the temple, that's the Buddha statue. But we don't see this process that we're just taking the colors, constructing it, perceiving, and cognizing what it is that we are perceiving. So here the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, started talking about what they're teaching in the psychology classes right now. I'm doing the Vakkali Sutta. In this story, Vakkali was a monk who was gravely ill. He couldn't visit the Buddha. He asked his friends to take him to send a message to the Buddha, to bow at his feet, and to ask him to please come see Vakkali. And the Buddha consented, he went. So the Buddha went and saw him and said, I hope you're feeling better and not worse. I hope that it's comfort, not pain, that you're feeling the most. And he said, Bhante, I'm feeling mostly pain. That's what I'm going through right now. And then the Buddha said, well, I hope you have nothing to regret. And he says, I have a lot of regret. And the Buddha said, well, I hope you don't have any regret because of your sila, or your virtue. And he said, no, I have no regret because of my sila or virtue. Then the Buddha said, then why is it that you have regret? And he said, because I have not been well enough to go see the Buddha. And the Buddha said, enough, Vakkali, why do you want to see this decaying body? Why do you want to see this putrid body? He says, one who sees the Dhamma sees me. One who sees me sees the Dhamma. For in seeing the Dhamma, Vakkali, one sees me. And in seeing me, one sees the Dhamma. And then he tells Vakkali how images, sensations, feelings, constructions, perception is all impermanent. He asks him, is what is permanent, is that suffering or happiness? He says suffering. Is what is impermanent and suffering and subject to change, should we regard it that this is me, this is mine, this I am? He says no. And so he came and he gave him this teaching on the Panca-Khanda. And I just described how we are all organisms in an environment. Normally, if you go and read about Panca-Khanda, you're going to hear Rupa is the body. That's what they say. Or they're going to say Rupa is materiality, matter. And then they're going to call Vedana, they'll call it feeling, that's good. Sanya, they're going to call perception. The problem is perception has some sort of cognitive process to it. So color, I just described how color was sensation. Before you put it together and create a picture, it's just color. So there's no cognitive process in that, just the color. So that's why the true sanya is not perception, it's sensation. Then construction is the sankhara, and the vijnana is usually translated as consciousness. But consciousness has thinking, and although there is some cognitive process during the perception, it is really in the mano vijnana, the passa, that there is the thinking part. So vijnana is really just perception. Perception is what we call seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and tasting. This is perception. So so that shows how when we think of rupa as a body or materiality, we're thinking existentially. We're thinking in terms of existence being the foundation of reality. But we all know that the Buddha teaches anatta, no self, no abiding everlasting entity. The Buddha teaches sunyata. Sunyata is there's no entity anywhere in the universe. It's all empty. But that doesn't mean there's not activities happening. So if we look at the 5 khandas, the 5 constituents of the process of perception, we don't see them as entities. We see them as activities. So I was telling them, when the painter takes his colors and puts it on a white sheet, uses the colors, puts them together, when we look at it, we don't see just the colors, we see an image. And that's how what's happening in our brain when we're looking out right now. We don't just see the color, we see an image. The image of me up here with a book, but it's really just colors. And what happens from there is that once we see the image, we give it a name, and then we use all our senses to create an object. So I become an object once you can hear me, touch me, smell me. Once you're using all your senses to isolate the object of me, that's when you create an object. But it really, if we look at just the process of perception, it's just sensations, feelings, constructions, and perception, and the image that is perceived. And the mind is taking these sensations and feelings to create a picture. And when there is the creation of a picture, there is perception of the picture. So this is what he's talking about. And when he says someone who sees the Dhamma sees me, and by seeing the Dhamma, how do you see the Buddha? By seeing the Dhamma. So we just talked about this process of perception. Once we walk out, I don't know about you guys, but me, I'm gonna forget most likely, and if someone cuts me off, I might get a little irritated. If we're perceiving in the classical way where we see objects out there and we think rupa is materiality, is matter, we're thinking existentially, and that leads to the emotional reaction. myself versus someone else. And that's how Vakkali said that he felt regret. He didn't see the object called the Buddha. He didn't see the body of the Buddha. So the Buddha had to correct his wrong view. He was thinking existentially. It's like, what's the point of seeing this decaying body? To see the Buddha, you have to see the Dhamma. To see the Dhamma, you have to see the Buddha. So to see the Dhamma, Dhamma stands for experience. Most people will say that Dhamma means the teaching of the Buddha. But the Buddha didn't mean Dhamma just as his teachings. What he meant is that his teaching is experience. He's not teaching existence. He's teaching experience. And that's why his first sermon was called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Dhamma means experience, Chakka means a wheel, and Pavattana means revolution of that wheel. He caused a paradigm shift. He revolved our way of thinking from existentialism to experiential thinking. So in order for us to truly see the Dhamma, we have to change the way we're perceiving reality. And to change the way we are perceiving reality is to think in terms of sensations, feelings, constructions, perceptions, and images. If you're walking around thinking in these terms, really understanding Panca-Khanda, the 5 constituents of the process of perception, you're going to become less deluded. It's going to be harder to take that yelling person who's in front of you yelling at you, to take him as an existing entity that's a bad person. You're just going to be hearing, sensation of sound, the sensation of heat when he's talking really close to me, the sensation, these are just sensations. And you're creating an image, and the sensations either give you a pleasant feeling or a painful feeling. Well, while that person's yelling at you, you have the sensations and you have the feeling that is a bit uncomfortable. It's not a pleasurable feeling, it's uncomfortable. And then the constructions, there are 3 types of constructions the Buddha talks about. One is a mental construction, the other is a verbal construction, and the other is a physical construction. The mental construction is made up of the sensation and feeling, sanya and vedana. That's called chitta sankara or mano sankara. Chitta and mano are both activities of the mind or the brain. The verbal construction is called questioning and answering. In everything that we do in life, we're going and asking, what is this? And we give an answer. This is that. What's going to happen then? This is going to happen then. What happened when I was this old? This happened with it. Everything we think is in terms of questions and answers. We're constantly just questioning and answering, even to ourselves. When we hear a person talking to himself, we think he's crazy, right? Out loud. But that's what we're doing every day, at least in my own experience. Maybe you guys are arhats, I don't know. So that's the verbal construction. And then there's the physical constructions, which is the breathing in and the breathing out. So with the mental construction, we're creating the image using the sensation and feeling. With the verbal construction, we're using our thinking in the form of verbal sentences, questioning and answering. And the physical construction is our breathing, which has to do with the emotions. However we construct it cognitively, it makes us react emotionally. So if that person yelling at you, you take it as an insult, hormones are going to go through your body, a fight or flight response. And you get attention and you want to react. But if you interpret it cognitively instead of an insult as a joke, then you're going to laugh. So that's how all the constructions work together. You build the image, you cognitively interpret it by questioning and answering, and you react emotionally with the breathing. If you get tense and tight, you're going to start breathing fast and not so deep. But if you're calm and relaxed, your breathing's going to be slow. So, if we understand this, and we understand it 24/7, we are starting to see reality as an experience rather than in terms of existence. So by seeing reality in terms of an experience, you're seeing the Dhamma. Now you truly see the Dhamma, you see the Buddha by doing that. Because that's how a Buddha sees reality. He sees it as only an experience. So we don't see the Buddha by having him resurrect or something like they say Jesus is going to resurrect and come back so we can see his physical body. The Buddha's never coming back. The only way we can still see the Buddha is by changing the way we are perceiving reality, by understanding this process of perception. Yes?
Well, isn't the Buddha never coming back because he never left?
Exactly. That's what he told Vakkali, right?
It's not a physical body, right?
Yeah, that's why he said, what's the point of seeing this putrid body? It's decaying. You're right, absolutely. So if we can understand that and live our lives with this understanding, we are going to see the Buddha and the Dhamma. That's how we do it. We'll talk more about it, and feel free to ask questions if you have any. Let's finish this sutra because it's super interesting. So after he gave him this talk about this process of perception, which he was way ahead of his time, they only barely started talking about reality like this within the last 50 years of psychology, with cognitive psychology especially. So then he goes, then the Blessed One, having given this exhortation to the Venerable Vakkali, rose from his seat and departed for Mount Vulture Peak. Then, not long after the Blessed One had left, the Venerable Vakkali addressed his attendants thus: "Come, friends, lift me up on this bed and carry me to the black rock on Isigili slope. How can one like me think of dying amongst the houses?" "Yes, friend," those bhikkhus replied, and having lifted the Venerable Vakkali on the bed, they carried him to the black rock on the Isigili slope. The Blessed One spent the rest of the day and night on Mount Vulture Peak. Then, when the night was well advanced, two devatas, two celestial beings, or two aliens, any of these translations will work, of stunning beauty approached the Blessed One. Illuminating the whole Mount Vulture Peak, standing to one side, one devata said to the Blessed One, "Venerable Sir, the Bhikkhu Vakkali is intent on deliverance." The other devata said, "Surely, Venerable Sir, he will be liberated as one well liberated." This is what those devatas said. Having said this, they paid homage to the Blessed One, and keeping him on their right, they disappeared right there. So two celestial beings came and made they must have been able to sense the mind of Vakkali and knew that his whole motivation now was to awaken, now that he understood what the Buddha was talking about. Then, when the night had passed, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: "Come, bhikkhus, approach the Bhikkhu Vakkali and say to him, 'Friend Vakkali, listen to the word of the Blessed One and the two devatas. Last night, friend, when the night was well advanced, two devatas of stunning beauty approached the Blessed One. One devata said to the Blessed One, "Venerable Sir, the Bhikkhu Vakkali is intent on deliverance." The other devata said, "Surely, Vakkali, he will be liberated as one well liberated." And the Blessed One says to you, friend Vakkali, "Do not be afraid, Vakkali. Do not be afraid. Your death will not be a bad one. Your demise will not be a bad one." "Yes, Venerable Sir," those bhikkhus replied, and they approached the Venerable Vakkali and said to him, "Friend Vakkali, listen to the word of the Blessed One and the two devatas." Then the Venerable Vakkali addressed his attendants: "Come, friends, lower me from my bed. How can one like me think of listening to the Blessed One's teachings while seated on a high seat?" So he made him sit him down to the ground so he could listen to the Buddha's words. Yes, friend, those bhikkhus replied, and they lowered the Venerable Vakkali from the bed. Last night, friend, 2 devatas of stunning beauty approached the Blessed One. One devata said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, the Bhikkhu Vakkali is intent on deliverance. The other devata said, Surely, Venerable Sir, he will be liberated as one well liberated. And the Blessed One says to you, friend Vakkali, do not be afraid, Vakkali. Do not be afraid. Your death will not be a bad one. Your demise will not be a bad one. Well then, friends, pay homage to the Blessed One in my name with your head at his feet and say, Venerable Sir, the Bhikkhu Vakkali is sick, afflicted, gravely ill. He pays homage to the Blessed One with his head at his feet. Then say, Images are impermanent. I have no confusion about this, Venerable Sir. I do not doubt that whatever is impermanent is suffering. I do not doubt that in regard to what is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, I have no more desire, lust, or affection for it. Feeling is impermanent. Sensation is impermanent. Constructions are impermanent. Perception is impermanent. I have no confusion about this, Venerable Sir. I do not doubt that whatever is impermanent is suffering. I do not doubt that in regard to what is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, I have no more desire, lust, or affection. Yes, friend, those bhikkhus replied. Then they departed. Then not long after the bhikkhus had left, the Venerable Vakkali used the knife. So he used the knife means he killed himself. Yeah, so this isn't the first instance. Well, we're going to find out how there's only a few. So there's also another sutra where another venerable one was also very sick, and he killed himself. So killing oneself is bad, right? We can agree on that. It's bad when we are thinking existentially. When the arahants who have already woken up ask the Buddha, why should we continue? We've done what had to be done. Birth is destroyed. There's no more coming into any state of existence. The Buddha said you should live for the welfare of all beings so that you can help others. That's why you should not kill yourself. But he didn't say you shouldn't kill yourself because it's bad. Because they were awakened already. There's no really killing yourself at that point. There's no yourself, there's no others, there's no nothing. So here, if he had killed himself while thinking of self and other, then that is a bad action. It's harming yourself. But if he kills himself while there's no idea of self or other and he's fully awakened, then there's no bad action that happened there. It's just empty activity. But let's see how this ends. Hello, welcome.
One comment too, and there's no benefit of others if he's too sick to be out there helping other people.
Yes, he couldn't even get up
now.
to see the Buddha, exactly.
So
we've heard of, what was that guy who was killing people because they wanted to?
the Dr. Tom? Or?
I just told my coworker about
Kevorkian.
Yeah.
Meditated suicide.
Dr. Kevorkian. He was helping people who were too sick to live, and it was too much pain to live with, to kill themselves. Well, they all thought they were existing, so it's probably not a good idea. You can't escape suffering by killing yourself.
And that was really political too, because he did it in a way that's highly traceable, where there's a way to do it where you can't tell.
Yeah.
And he did it he was trying to make a political statement, related to carbon monoxide. If you don't want him to see what it is, use helium.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember Dr. Kevorkian?
Yes.
He used to help people to kill themselves. We all know suffering does not come to an end by killing yourself, right? You do that, you're going to be reborn most likely in a bad place, either an animal, the ghost world, or the hells. Why? Because no good action comes from a bad action. But if this Venerable Vakkali had already brought suffering to an end by awaking, he's not killing himself to escape suffering anymore. There's no karma, good or bad. So that's why this is not a bad action. It's just activities without personalizing. So
can I ask,
yes.
So it's not because he was sick and he was in pain that he did it.
It may have been part of the conditions, but there was no personalizing any of those conditions.
So he was feeling the pain, but he wasn't feeling the suffering.
There was no suffering. There was pain.
He just saw it as an activity.
Impersonal activity. The Buddha said, Sava dukkha, Sava anicca sankara, Sava dukkha sankara, or Sava sankara anicca, Sava sankara dukkha, and then he says Sava Dhamma anatta. So he says all constructions are impermanent, all constructions are painful, but all experience is impersonal. So this is what was happening. All the experience, if you can consider them as painful or pleasant, they're all impersonal at this point for this Venerable Vakkali, because he had awakened listening to the Buddha and penetrating what he meant. So it says, the Venerable Vakkali used the knife. Then those bhikkhus approached the Blessed One and delivered their message. The Blessed One then addressed the bhikkhus thus: Come, bhikkhus, let us go to the black rock on Isigili slope, where the clansman Vakkali has used the knife. Yes, Venerable Sir. Those bhikkhus replied. Then the Blessed One, together with a number of bhikkhus, went to the black rock on Isigili slope. The Blessed One saw in the distance the Venerable Vakkali lying on the bed with his shoulders turned. Now on that occasion, a cloud of smoke, a swirl of darkness, was moving to the east, then to the west, then to the north, and then to the south, upwards and downwards, into all directions. And the Blessed One then addressed the bhikkhus thus: Do you see to the east, then to the west, then to the north, to the south? Do you see that cloud of smoke, that swirl of darkness, looking in all directions? Yes, Venerable Sir. That, bhikkhus, is Mara, the evil one, searching for the perception of the clansman Vakkali, wondering where now has his perception of the clansman Vakkali has been established. However, bhikkhus, with perception unestablished anywhere, the clansman Vakkali has attained final nibbana. So Mara was trying to see, where did this guy who killed himself, where did his perception go? Did he go to the hells, to the animal realms, the ghost realms? He couldn't find him. And that's because he attained final nirvana. There is this simile the Buddha gives. I think I've shared it here once or twice, about a house with windows on the west, the east, and the north. If light comes in from those windows, where does it fall? It falls on the southern wall. If there is no southern wall and the light comes from those windows, where does it fall? It falls on the ground. If there is no ground, where does it fall? It falls on water. If there is no water and no ground, no anything, where does it fall? It doesn't fall anywhere. This is what happens once he attained the full awakening. No longer did he have this process of perception to land anywhere and start creating a name, an image, and then cognizing, and then a feeling based on what you cognize, and then acting emotionally based on that feeling. This is paticca samuppada. This is the process of experience. So since he was free and his perception didn't land anywhere in the universe, there was nowhere the Mara could find him. So this shows us how he, even though he used the knife, he didn't use the knife to bring suffering to an end. He used the knife just because he had done what had to be done. And he, like Fred said, he was already old and he couldn't move anymore. So he couldn't really stay longer to help others. Like the Buddha told the Arahants to not kill themselves because they can help others. So this story talks about the Panca-Khanda. I've read the whole Majjhima Nikaya, and I've read a lot of the Samyutta Nikaya. I've read a lot of the Anguttara and some of the Digha Nikaya. In all these sutras, the main thing the Buddha wants you to understand is this Panca-Khanda, this process of perception. In the first sutra that he preached to the 5 ascetics who were taking care of him before he was awakened, he's told them, it was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and he said, birth is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, not getting what you want is suffering, getting what you don't want is suffering, and being separated from what you want is suffering. And then he says, in short, this whole process of perception that we personalize is suffering. So this process of perception is, I heard once Alan Watts say, Alan Watts was an English philosopher who studied Zen and Buddhism. He said, we're like fish in water. A fish in water doesn't know that it is in water. We are like fish in water, except the water is perception. There's nowhere, I asked you, have you guys ever experienced even 1 second where you're not seeing reality through this process of perception? I don't think there's none of us here, or else we would be in the Parinibbana.
Because of the space-time.
So how does space-time, this is how we normally understand reality. We understand reality as entities existing, occupying space and occupying time. And we take this as the foundation of reality. We think we exist because we were born. We came out of our mothers and now we are existing because of birth. That's how the normal perception works. But that's not Dhamma, that's not experience. Experience shows us in the Paticca Samuppada, it doesn't go birth first and then existence. It goes existence first and then birth. Bhava, Pacha, Jati. So if we analyze the Paticca Samuppada, the Buddha says we are all unconscious, insentient of this process of perception. So the first step in how we create reality is unconsciousness, avijja. Vijja is consciousness, avijja is unconsciousness. And then from avijja, the mind starts constructing immediately. Avijja, pacha, sankara. And then when the mind is unconscious, as soon as the senses get stimulated by the environment, because we are organisms in the environment and we have 5 senses, and our senses get stimulated by the environment, our mind automatically starts constructing. So from avijja, pacha, sankara. Pacha means leads to, or it comes from.
I had, kind of heard a couple things, and I had this discussion with Bhante a while back, that it's not actually birth is suffering, but with birth there is suffering. Or that saying birth is suffering is kind of a different translation from maybe.
Well, that question, we have to analyze where it's coming from. Is it coming from taking birth as the organism coming out of the mother? Or is that coming from birth, taking it as the birth of myself? So there's the birth of an organism.
As an action. Birth is an action, really.
So there was an organism that came out of the mother, but that's not the birth that the Buddha is talking about that is suffering. The birth that the Buddha is talking about that is suffering is the birth of myself.
Right. But I understand that some of the translations that are actually more accurately not to say that birth is suffering. I don't know if you understand that, but I discussed that with Bhante, and he kind of agreed to that, that's not the best translation.
That's why you have to ask whether it's the birth of the organism or
I'm just saying the way that it's phrased. If you take a better translation, then you have to interpret the translation. But
that's why we have to recognize that birth does not come from being born from an organism. Birth comes from us cognizing a self, an existing self. So from unconsciousness comes the construction. The mind starts constructing as soon as it's stimulated by the environment. Once it starts constructing, it starts using sensations and feelings like bricks, sensations and feelings to create. Once there's construction, there is perception, sankhara, pacha, vijnana. Perception, because now that something has been constructed, there has to be perception of what has been constructed. So it went from unconsciousness to construction to perception of what has been constructed. So what happens once there is construction and perception of what has been constructed? We name the image that we see that has been constructed. So from unconsciousness comes construction, from construction comes perception, and from perception we name the image that we see constructed. That is the nama rupa. We normally hear nama as body or materiality and nama as mentality. But it just means name and image. So now the construction that's happening unconsciously created an image. Perception, vijnana, sees that image and gives it a name. So vijnana, pacha, nama, rupa. When we get stimulated by the senses, it sends a message to the brain. The brain receives it and starts to use all the senses to interpret it. It uses the hearing, the tasting, the touching, the feeling. So that's why it goes from nama rupa, pacha, salayatana. Salayatana is the 6 senses. So once there has been a construction that started unconsciously, then there was a perception, and then there was a name given to an image that is perceiving, then it's using the whole 6 senses to interpret what it is perceiving. And then from salayatana, the 6 senses, pacha, passo. Passo is passa, is cognition. So once all the 6 senses are being utilized, so that means the 4 lobes of the cortex, the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the prefrontal cortex. All those lobes have different things in the body. Occipital lobe is for the seeing, the images. The parietal lobe is for the movement. The temporal lobe is a lot of the perception. And the prefrontal cortex, that's the thinking part. So now it's using the whole brain, all the senses, to cognize. Cognize means to interpret what you're perceiving. Once you've used your whole brain, salayatana, pacha, passo, and you cognize, then it says passa, pacha, vedana. Vedana is the feeling. Now that you cognize, the feeling comes into play. So this used to confuse me, and I asked Bhante Punnaji once, why does Vedana come after Passa when it is being used to construct during the process of perception, like Sanya? Because Sankhara, the 2nd step, uses sensations and feelings to construct. Why does the feelings come until we've cognized? And he said it's because we're not conscious until cognition. That's when we become conscious of this process. And it's only when we're conscious of the process that there is a feeling that we experience. So once we interpret it, remember we used the example of a man coming to you and yelling at you right in front of your face. If you interpret that as an insult, you get angry. If you interpret it as an insult, it's unpleasant. And from that unpleasantness, you get anger, the emotional reaction. But if you interpret it as a joke, then there is no anger that comes up.
No, it's not a joke. I mean, you could interpret it as someone who's suffering. I mean, that would be my approach. That this is someone who's suffering, and their problem does not need to become my problem.
But you see
But I
how,
can have compassion for that problem, and in doing that, I don't have anger.
and you see how the interpretation leads to the feeling that is experienced.
Is the teaching about perception in a way contrary to Western science? Because, for example, like if I'm not directly looking at the moon, I'm in this room, I can't see the moon. Does that mean the moon does not exist? That's
a good question. There is a book on quantum science where they say that if you actually really watch a molecule or a subatomic particle, by watching it, you're collapsing the wave, the quantum wave, into a particle by watching it. And they said, will a watch pot boil? And they got the consensus of all the scientists who do the calculations. They say it won't boil.
Because common sense tells me that, of course, the moon is still there, whether I don't see it or not. I mean,
well, let's look at it like this. Let's look at it in the terms of experience. The process that says there is a moon there, that's cognition, cognizing the situation, using words and images.
Right.
That process of using words and images to cognize only happens if there is stimulation of the senses first.
Yeah, but so, the instruments that we use in science, telescopes, all this material evidence we have of different objects, it's completely reliant on our perception of it, in that sense.
Yeah, so before we can say that there is anything, there has to be perception. Without perception, there won't be any cognition. So that's how it would work. And it was really interesting that scientists said that if we are paying attention close enough, that pot on the fire won't boil.
That doesn't mean science is meaningless, does it? I mean,
oh, no. Science is just a tool to try to understand reality. The thing is, they're understanding reality objectively. They're trying to understand reality objectively. Where Buddhism is an experience. An experience is, there's a dichotomy in experience. The dichotomy of experience is the subjective experience and the objective experience. So the teachings of the Buddha is more harmonious and complete, where it's looking at both the objective and the subjective. So the Buddha analyzed the subjective experience of reality by talking about the Panca-Khanda, the 5 constituents of perception. But he also analyzed the objective reality, what is out there, quote unquote. And he used the 6 elements. He used solidity, he used liquidity, he used heat, motion, space, and perception. So even by analyzing the objective reality, he also included perception in that. And that's what the quantum physicists found out, that they only know if the photon is a particle or a wave if there's perception of what's happening.
The uncertainty principle?
Yeah, exactly. That certainty only comes once there is a perceiver. Then you collapse that wave and you create a particle.
Right.
So the Buddha was way ahead of his time. He knew already what the quantum physicists would only find out in the 20th century, that they don't know whether light is a particle or a wave. The Buddha saw this, so when he analyzed the objective reality, he said solidity, liquidity, heat, motion, space, and perception. And when he analyzed the subjective reality, he used Rupa, Sanya, Vedana, Sankara, Vijnana. The image, the image is the objective part. And then sensation, feeling, construction, perception, which is the subjective part.
Perhaps one of my problems is I'm trying to logically reason through it, but you have to experience it in a Buddhist sense, you know what I mean? You have to have the insight, right? Which is a different thing than logically getting this.
Well, take a look online at a guy named Donald Hoffman. He talks about time space being like the screen on a laptop, and then perceptions, you see things or like icons. And yeah, if you delete that file and you wrote your thesis in there, there's real consequences, but it's not. But that's not it. You know, what you're perceiving is not what it really is.
Right.
And it's really interesting his breakdown. He's done a couple books on that.
Thanks.
And a little like if a tree falls in the forest, it doesn't make a sound. Not if no one perceives it, because sound is the perception of those vibrations. It's not.
If there's no eardrum to catch the vibrations of the air,
that's not a sound. There's vibrations, but it's only sound when it's perceived.
That is basically what
sort of a weak metaphor, but
no, it's true. And just how you were talking about the moon, is it there or not? The Buddha in the Brahmajala Sutra, which is the first sutra of the long discourses of the Digha Nikaya, he goes over the 62 wrong views or the 62 distorted perspectives of reality. And he says how each perspective that they have on reality is based on cognition. And cognition is based on the six senses, naming an image, perception, construction, and unconsciousness. All cognition is based on the act of sense perception, experience. Experience is nothing fancy. It just means seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and thinking. So there were three philosophers in Western civilization during the Age of Enlightenment. This was around between like 1600 to 1800 in Europe, when people were coming out of the Dark Ages. Why were they in the Dark Ages? Because they were dogmatic. Everything they were explaining through God. And then what happened? People started to use science, and they called it the Age of Enlightenment. And by using science, they realized that God is not creating the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the rain. That's not coming because of God. They found an important principle of reality, which is called determinism. Determinism means everything happens due to the presence of the necessary conditions. So if we want to have a flame, we'll take a lighter. What is that lighter doing? It is providing the necessary conditions for a flame to come. So this understanding that everything needs the presence of the necessary conditions for whatever is going to happen, that's a huge, huge idea that when people figured out, science started, and all of a sudden they came out of the Dark Ages because they stopped thinking dogmatically and started thinking in terms of reality. And there was three philosophers in the United Kingdom. One of them was John Locke. John Locke, he was a materialist. He says there is no such thing as the mind, because the mind is just an activity of the body. The only thing that exists is the body. So in Europe, in Ireland, there was a bishop, a Catholic bishop, Bishop Berkeley. And he didn't like the idea of there being no mind, because he's a Catholic and he wants the spirit to matter. So he's like, he's wrong. He's saying there's only a body and there's no mind, but what he calls the body is just an idea. And what he calls the body, he gets through seeing, hearing, tasting, and he comes up with an idea called the body. So in reality, there's only the mind. There is no body. So you have one guy saying there is no mind because the mind is just the activity of the body. And you have the other guy saying there is no body because to call it
of the body without the mind.
That's just, it's an idea of the mind. So people were like, who's right? Like, we don't know. They both make sense. And then came a man from Scotland named David Hume. And David Hume said that they're both wrong and they're both partially right. So one was saying there's only matter, no mind. The other was saying there was only mind, no matter. Idealism versus materialism. Well, David Hume came in and he said, all there is sense experience. Hearing, seeing, touching, feeling, smelling, and thinking. That's all we can talk about. Well, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha had a sutra called the Sabha Sutta. Sabha means all. He said, this is the all. This is everything. What is everything? The eyes and the image, the ear and the sounds, the nose and the smells, the tongue and the tastes, the body and the feelings. So David Hume got to the point of it, which is experience is the underlying base of reality. We can't talk about anything without using our six senses. But there's one important difference in the sixth sense versus the rest of the senses. So the hearing, tasting, touching, feeling, and seeing, all those things, those are just perception, a percept. But when you talk, that's Chaku Vijnana, Sota Vijnana, Gandha Vijnana, Jiva Vijnana, and Kaya Vijnana. But then he talks about thinking by saying Mano Vijnana. Mano Vijnana is different than the other perceptions. Perception of thinking is different than the other perceptions because now you're using concepts. The first five were just perception. But now by using Mano Vijnana, where all the other senses go up to like telephone wires to the brain, now it's it's called Mano Vijnana, thinking. And that's where consciousness comes from. So you can't have consciousness that cognizes and makes all these theories about reality without first having the sense perception. And that's what David Hume saw, that the both philosophers were wrong. It's not matter versus mind. It's just experience. And that's what the Buddha talks about when he talks about paticca samuppada. He says, all there is you're unconscious and the mind starts constructing. And based on what is constructed, there's perception. And when there's perception, you give a name to the image that was constructed. And then you use all your six senses to fully cognize what you are perceiving and interpret what you're perceiving. By creating that interpretation using cognition, there's a feeling based on that interpretation. When there is a feeling, there is an emotional reaction based on that feeling. When there is an emotional reaction based on the feeling, there is personalizing. And when there is personalizing, you create a sense of a self. And when you think there is a self, then there is birth, aging, sickness, and death. And why does that happen? Up to the point where there was a feeling and an emotional reaction, that was all just activities happening. Activity causing activity, causing activity, causing activity, like domino effect. And then only when we personalize, then we even start thinking about a self. You cannot personalize without having an I, a self. So from the feeling Vedana, there came the emotional reaction, Tanha. From the emotional reaction, Tanha, came Upadana, personalizing. And from personalizing comes Bhava. a self. And to personalize means to claim ownership of it. Just how if you personalize a pen, what does that mean? You get your name written on that pen. Now it's mine. Well, from personalizing comes existence. And what does existence mean? Existence means an entity occupying space and occupying time. So if we're going to personalize this whole process of perception and the thinking and the emotions, what is it that we're pointing to that's occupying space? The body. The body is occupying space. And is it occupying time as well? Yeah, the body had a past called birth, a future called death, and a present moment called aging. So when we personalize, we pointed at the only thing we can point to, which is the body, and they said, all right, now the past of the body, that's my past. So that means I was born when I came out of my mother. Or you'll say the future of the body, then I'm gonna die. Or you think right now, this present, I'm getting old. All these thoughts cause suffering. And this is what the Buddha talked about, why we need to understand this process of perception. Because we're unconscious of the first part of this 12-step process. And because we're unconscious of that, we become conscious halfway through this paticca samuppada. And becoming conscious halfway, we think that we're interpreting everything as existing, and we think that's reality. And because we think that's reality, we personalize the emotions, the thoughts, the sensations and feelings, the images. Not only do we personalize these things that we're experiencing now, we're personalizing past thoughts, past images, past feelings, past sensations, and future thoughts, future feelings, future emotions. This is all causing suffering. This is samsara. This is the cycle of birth and death. So that's why understanding the Panca-Khanda is so important. Once they asked the Buddha what the point of panya, wisdom, is, and the point of vijnana, perception, is. And he said, the point of panya, wisdom, is to develop wisdom. And he said, the point of perception, vijnana, is to understand vijnana. So that's why I chose this talk. It was like, anything that talks about Panca-Khanda, I think, is the most important thing in life. And especially if you understand it with the modern psychology terms. I think there's time. I had another sutta we can talk about. I'll do it quickly, unless anyone has questions. I know it's a lot of stuff that I've been saying. Hope it makes sense. This is all stuff I've learned from Bhante Punnaji. And Bhante Punnaji learned it from the Buddha. So this isn't anything of mine. This is all the words of the Buddha. How Bhante Punnaji translated and made sense to me to translate for others. There's a sutra in the Majjhima Nikaya, which is called the Middle Length Discourses. This one that we learned, the first sutra, is the connected discourses called the Samyutta Nikaya. Samyutta is to conjoin. So that's why the connected discourses. To disjoin is Visamyutta. Put the letter VI in front of Samyutta to disjoin. So there's my favorite sutra is called the Honeyball Sutta, which is this one, the Madhupindika Sutta. And it's called Honeyball Sutra because at any point that you put your attention to this process of perception, cognition, emotion, any point you use your sati, awareness, it's like having a ball of honey, and that anywhere that you put it, you taste the sweetness of it. The Honeyball Sutta. So by applying your attention at any point in this process, it's sweet for you. So this book has the translation by a bhikkhu named Bhikkhu Bodhi, but I have a few passages that are retranslated by Bhante Punnaji that I think drive home the meaning better. So it says, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country of Kapilavatthu in Nigroda's park. Then when it was morning, the Blessed One dressed and taking his bowl and outer robe, went to Kapilavatthu for alms. So it was time for him to go house to house looking for food. When he had wandered for alms in Kapilavatthu and had returned from his alms round after his meal, he went to the great wood for the day's abiding. Entering the great wood, sat down on a root of a bilba sapling for the day's abiding. Dandapani, who was a Sakyan, Dandapani means the guy walking with a stick. The commentaries say he didn't even need a walking stick, he was doing it just for the style. While walking and wandering for exercise, also went to the great wood, and when he had entered the great wood, he went to the bilba sapling where the Blessed One was and exchanged greetings with him. When the courteous and amiable talk was finished, he stood at one side, leaning on his stick, and asked the Blessed One, "What does the recluse assert? What does he proclaim?" So he's asking the Buddha, what is your teaching? So I like Bhante Punnaji's translation. So this is what the Buddha answered to him. He says, "My teaching is not to come in conflict with anyone in the world. I do not have any attachment to sensual pleasures, nor do I argue with anyone. I have no concern for existence nor non-existence. I have no emotional reaction to sensations, and I am not concerned with what is perceived." Can you imagine asking someone what is teaching this and hearing that? Well, when he said this, Dandapani the Sakyan shook his head, wagged his tongue, and raised his eyebrows until his forehead was puckered with 3 lines. And then he departed, leaning on his stick. So he didn't even say anything. He just walked off, confused. Then when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation and went to Nigroda's park, where he sat down on a seat made ready for him and told the bhikkhus what had taken place. And a certain bhikkhu asked the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, how does the Blessed One assert and proclaim his teaching in such a way that he does not quarrel with anyone in the world?" So I'll read what it says in the book, how he explains it. He says, "As to the source through which sensations and notions born of categorizing, if there is nothing found there to delight in, welcome, or hold on to, this is the end of the underlying tendency for passion, the underlying tendency for hatred, the underlying tendency for perspectives, the underlying tendency for cognitive dissonance, the underlying tendency for conceit, the underlying tendency for desire for existence, the underlying tendency of unconsciousness. This is the end of resorting to rods and weapons, of quarrels and brawls, disputes, recrimination, malicious words, false speech. Here these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder." And how Bhante Punnaji translated this verse, he says, "In whatever way a person recognizes something by classifying it or labeling it, in this way that past experience begins to affect future behavior unconsciously." So it's a lot more to the point. He's saying, however you're going to recognize and classify it and start interpreting it, it's this ways that your past experiences of doing this will affect your behavior unconsciously. You're going to be unconscious, and it's going to lead to fighting, to all these things that the Buddha said that would end if you didn't do this. So then, after saying this, the Buddha, no monk who was listening asked him anything further, so the Buddha just went into his room for his days abiding. And then all the people, all the bhikkhus were confused. They're like, well, how do we do this? We should have asked the Buddha. And so they said, well, Maha Kaccana is here. Maha Kaccana is known to be very wise, and he can explain the meaning of the short words that the Buddha said. So they go look for Maha Kaccana. And then Maha Kaccana, he's very strict, and he kind of tells them, like, what were you thinking? You had the Buddha there. Why would you come and ask me and not the Buddha? I am like the leaves on a tree, where the Buddha is the core of the tree. Why would you want to find truth out here in the leaves when you had the core right there in front of you? And he calls them some cool names. He says Chaku Bhutto, Jnana Bhutto, Dhamma Bhutto, Brahma Bhutto. He says the Buddha is vision, the Buddha is knowledge, the Buddha is experience, the Buddha is God. These are the ways he described the Buddha. And then all the bhikkhus said, I'm sorry, you're right, we should have asked him there, but please just tell us. And then, so Maha Kaccana said, all right, I'll explain what he meant. And he said, he goes, Chakuncha paticha rupecha upajati chaku vinyanam. Chakuncha means the eye. Paticha rupecha. Rupe is the image. And upajati chaku vinyanam. Upajati means comes into being. And chaku vinyana is eye perception. So that with the activity called eye, the image arises, gives rise to eye perception. Then he says, Tinam Sangati Passo. The presence of these three conditions gives rise to passo, cognition, forming concepts about the world. And then he says, Passa Pachaya Vedana. When there is cognition, there is feeling. Van Vedati Tam Sanjanati. Whatever is felt, it is also sensed. Yam Sanjanati Tam Vitaketi. Whatever is sensed, it is inferred. Vitaketi Tam Papancheti. Whatever is inferred, it is recognized. So this is saying what we were talking in the Panca-Khanda, that with the eye and the light, there is the image. And when there is an image and an eye organ, there comes perception called seeing. And when there is seeing, then comes cognition, interpreting. And then it says when you interpret, there is a feeling that comes. When there is a feeling, you sense that there is a feeling. And when you have sense, there is an inference. And when you have inferred, you start to categorize. And so by categorizing is how we start to get all these problems in the world. That's how people start fighting, taking up weapons and hurting each other. My country, my house, like what we're doing to a lot of the refugees or illegal immigrants, and like holding them up. It's all because of categorizing. They're not patriots. They're not American citizens. They're not this or that. So it's the categorizing that's causing all the problems in the world. And so after Maha Kaccana explains that from the eye and the image comes eye perception, from these three conditions comes cognition, from cognition comes a feeling, from the feeling comes that you sense that there is a feeling, from sensing there is a feeling, there is an inference, which is a conclusion you make, and from a conclusion you make, there is a categorization of the perception. And so then he says, and he says this for everything too. He says from the ear and a sound comes hearing, and from hearing comes cognition, from cognition feeling, from feeling is sense, from sensing the feeling there is inference, from inference there is categorization. Same with the nose and the smell, the tongue and the taste, the body and the tangible feeling. And then he says, when there is an eye, an image, and perception, it is possible to have awareness about this. You can become aware of the eye, you can become aware of the image, you can become aware of the cognition, you can become aware of the feeling, you can become aware of the sense, you can become aware of the inference, you can become aware of the categorizing process. By becoming aware of all these things, it brings it to an end. By being unaware of this process, then you are overwhelmed by the emotions because you're not aware that this is a process happening based on antecedents and conditions. You're just going to be aware of, that guy did this to me, I'm going to fight him, or that guy took this away from me, I'm going to get it back. You're just caught in the world of categorization. And it's basically like a mental matrix you're creating based on concepts.
Well, yeah, I kind of think categorizing is, let's say you never had chocolate, and you had chocolate one time, but you had a virus you didn't realize when you threw up, and you might now have an aversion to chocolate. So you categorize that, so you're not taking it fresh as what's presented. And so every time you're categorizing, you're using memory. And those memories are associated with conditions that are not present. Right?
And when you're not conscious of this, using the memory, then that's why Bhante Punnaji said that past experiences will affect your behavior unconsciously.
Yeah, it's like one time I ate a banana that wasn't a little green when I was a kid. I didn't eat a banana for like 3 years, right? Because I perceived it in a way that was not appropriate for the time. Because I categorized it from my memory, which was from in the past.
And the word categorizing, I guess, can lead to tribalism.
Oh, definitely.
That kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if we can function without doing that to a degree, but that's why being aware of it is useful.
By becoming aware, we move away from tribalism and we move towards civilization.
Sorry, go ahead.
Civilization is where different tribes and cultures can come and have an interchange.
Right.
And that's what the Buddha was trying to do. He was trying to civilize people. But everyone's always into tribalism, right?
I think like something like mathematics would be a wholesome categorization, right? Because you're using that part of your brain, but you're doing something productive.
Yeah, it's interesting though. When you get
as long as you're not creating a nuclear bomb.
They think that why mathematics works logically beyond verbal and theoretical things is because we developed that because it's like as a primitive. If you have a certain number of pieces, say you get 10 apples. Keeping track of that was important for survival. So there's some theories that the reason we're able to do higher logic and in mathematics is because we developed that from a survival mechanism. So it's a biological.
Time's up.
So for perception there
You can ask
is a
questions.
little different, a little more developed. It's just one theory. I don't really prove it.
I'm just going to read the end. It says, so Maha Kaccana explained all this, and I'm going really quick. You guys can go and read it. It's Sutra number 18 in the middle length discourses, the Honeyball Sutra. It goes, then the bhikkhus, having delighted and rejoiced in Venerable Maha Kaccana's words, they rose from their seats and went to the Blessed One. After paying homage to him, they sat down at one side and told the Blessed One all that had taken place after he had left, adding, then, Venerable Sir, we went to the Venerable Maha Kaccana and asked him about the meaning. The Venerable Maha Kaccana expounded the meaning to us with these terms and statements and phrases. And then the Buddha says, Maha Kaccana is wise, bhikkhus. Maha Kaccana is of great wisdom. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in the same way that Maha Kaccana has explained it. Such is the meaning of this, and so you should remember it. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, just as a man exhausted by hunger and weakness came upon a honey ball, wherever he would taste it, he would find sweet, delectable flavor. So too, Venerable Sir, any able-minded bhikkhu, wherever he might scrutinize with wisdom the meaning of this discourse on the Dhamma, would find satisfaction and confidence of mind. Venerable Sir, what is the name of this discourse on the Dhamma? As to that, Ananda, you may remember this discourse on the Dhamma as the Honeyball Sutta. That is what the Blessed One said, and Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So we talked about perception. We talked about how perception leads to cognition. Cognition leads to emotion. Emotion leads to personalizing. Personalizing leads to creating a self. Creating a self leads to thinking you were born, that you're getting old, and that you're going to die. By bringing attention and awareness to any part of this process, you get out of that delusion. And now you're thinking in terms of Dhamma instead of existence. By seeing this Dhamma in that way, by putting attention to this process, now you see the Buddha. Because the Buddha is someone who sees the Dhamma. And someone who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha. You essentially become the Buddha. The point is to become the Buddha forever, like where you don't get shaken back into the dream of existence. Thank you, Bhante. Do you have anything to share, Bhante?
No, this is a very important thing to understand, because you can get the sudden awakening or sudden enlightenment from this, as we know from Bahia. So Bahia just heard a little bit of this, how the process of perception worked, and he didn't have to like practice vipassana meditation or anything. He just heard this and he became awakened. And so it's a very powerful teaching. It's a very deep teaching. It's a very direct teaching. And it's one of those things that it's right under your feet or it's right in front of your face, so you don't notice it, right? Like I always use this example, we take for granted our family. We're like, they love me anyways because they're my family, right? Not until you get separated from them, you're like, oh wow, all the love that I had for them, they were someone important to me. But when you're a child, you're like, oh yeah, Dad, stop bothering me. It's like that. So this teaching is apparent. It's right in front of our face, the experience itself, but we can't see it because it's so close to us. We're like blindsided by it, but it's right here within every time we're smelling, tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, even thinking, it's right there. You can become awakened right there in any moment like that if you realize how this process is working, because you begin to see the impersonality of experience. And every time you take experience to be impersonal, then that is a moment of buddhi, of awakening. And the key is to get such a dramatic penetration of it that you never come back into the regular perception, the subjective mode, subjective and objective, and it's just all experiential. So that's the real key. It's a very powerful teaching, and I know it can be like boring sometimes because it's very repetitive, right? Like this and this, then this and that, then this and this, then you're like, oh, it's time, right? And it's not juicy. It's not like a story of what the Buddha did or like something interesting sometimes. So like I know like it's difficult, maybe like math class or something, you're like listening to formulas and you're like, oh, this is like a Buddhist formula, but this is like really where where the meat's at, right? This is like the real meat. When we hear like Dhammapada stories, and that's like to make us feel good, right? Or like to get inspiration. But if you really want to know what you should be doing, or like to be technical about things, you have to understand this. That all experiences are impersonal. That's the real key.
Well, this is like the description of Irhat, like, okay, I'm feeling the carpet here, but in Irhat, this is the sensation of the carpet against my skin, the skin.
Yeah,
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's how Irhat sees it. So in a way, you can kind of think of that in your everyday experience. I'm perceiving this way, rather than this is this way.
Yeah, that's the difference between perception and saying is. Is means existence.
And that's an inference.
And that's an inference, and that's the problem when you start inferring things. Inferring is when you elaborate on experience. You say something outside of experience. You add something more to the experience itself.
Well, and this goes to like what we were talking about, like the thing where I eat bananas. For 3 years I didn't eat bananas, you know, and of course that situation was that situation. This was a completely different moment. But by categorizing, you bring all that stuff. Like when you go Christmas, you know, and you go in and you smell the Christmas tree. Watch yourself. You know, there's going to be associations with that. And it could be a bad day, but you're going to say, "Oh, this is nice," right?
There's the expression "going through the motions." Is that the right?
Yeah.
Where like we go through our day, we go to our job, we do our work, and we just kind of almost in autopilot.
Yeah.
But I guess the idea is to have an awareness of what is actually happening, right? Sort of. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
To
definitely.
kind of be observing, but then to kind of like observe the observer. You know?
I once was outside reading a book that Bhante Sanata had given me. It was the Theragatha, and Bhante Punnaji had walked in from his walk. He was on a walk, and he made a joke. He's like, "Oh, you've come to become a monk, eh?" And I said, not yet, Bhante." And then he says, "What are you reading?" And I said, "Oh, Bhante Sanata just gave me this book." He said, "Oh," he sat down next to me and started reading it. And then I'm just there like that. And then he's just reading it. And I'm like, okay, I know what's going on. I'm just going to meditate. He's just reading it. And I'm just meditating, doing anapanasati. And then it felt like after 40 minutes of him just reading it and me quietly being there, I'm like, all right, I don't know if he's testing me or what. Like, all right, I'm going to test this out. I'm just going to go to the restroom. And so I get up. And he goes, "Oh, do you need to go?" And I said, "No, Bhante, I'm not leaving yet. I'm just going to use the restroom." "Oh, okay." And I go in there and I come back out. And he's like, "Oh, very good book." And he gave it back to me. I think he knew that I got tired or something. And then he goes, "The key is the constant examination of the present." And that was it. That was my teaching for the day. He said, the constant examination of the present.
It was 40 minutes, like 40 minutes. I was counting because I was upstairs.
You serious?
Yeah.
Now I don't know, because now all I have is my memory. So
it was a long time.
It's kind of like the Zen where they say, "What is this?"
So it's the same thing as being mindful?
Yeah, just constant examination. If you're always examining, then you're always going to see either the sensation, the feeling, the construction. But if you're not examining it, then there's just the angry person yelling at you.
So the goal would be not to attach to what you experience?
That would be great.
Is that the goal?
In short, yes. There is this sutra where the Buddha was asked by a god, Saka, and he asked the Buddha, "Can you teach me the end of suffering in short?" And can you believe asking that to the Buddha? Can you tell me the truth, but keep it short? And the Buddha said, "There is no experience worth personalizing. Understanding that all feelings are impermanent, by knowing this, you know everything." So like you said, by not clinging to it, not attaching, basically just not personalizing it.
So that's being mindful, to know that and be mindful of that.
Yes. The goal, maybe Bhante can explain further, but the goal is, in order to get there, to the point where you're not personalizing everything, we have to understand this process of that there's sensations, feelings, constructions. It's not how you're interpreting it normally as just me and then another person fighting or whatever. It's just all a process of perception. By understanding that it's just a process of perception happening, you're not doing it, the other person's not doing it, it's just happening. That's why the Buddha said, Sabba Dhamma Anatta, all experience is impersonal. So in order to get to that impersonal experience, by not attaching to anything, we see this process of paticca samuppada. We see the process, how the mind starts constructing and creating and interpreting. and reacting emotionally and personalizing.
I just want to clarify, like, not personalizing means not creating a me, myself, and I out of it.
Yes.
It doesn't mean disinterest, like, oh look, like someone's hitting my child, like I don't care. That's not what it means, okay? Because sometimes people think detachment means like you don't care.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen because the Buddha cared, right? So the Buddha tried to protect his family when there was going to be the invasion, and the Buddha tried to stop the two kingdoms from going to war. So the Buddha cared. He had Maha Kaccana, great compassion for all the beings, right? But he was detached. That means he didn't personalize the experience, although he realized that there was still suffering in the world. So we just got to make that clear, because that's a big critique or criticism that people have about Buddhists. Oh, if you become detached, then you won't care about anything.
Yeah.
That's false, because you see the Buddha and all the arahants and all the awakened beings, they always care about everyone. They're always like, because they're completely selfless, right? If we think about it that way, as selfless, and they do selfless actions, then that's how they have the compassion out of selflessness. It's because of egocentric thinking, self-centered thinking, me, myself, and I, that all the problems come in the world. And that comes from personalizing the thoughts, personalizing the feelings, personalizing the sensations, all these things. So being detached means recognizing that experiences are impersonal, that there's no self. It doesn't mean that you don't care about what's happening. So we have to be very careful, because people can misunderstand it sometimes.
Do wholesome states naturally come once you have this mindfulness, the wholesome like compassion, like wisdom, these things?
Yeah. Usually we are unconscious of what's happening inside, and that is because we're all extroverted. Even if you're an introvert, you're always extroverted. That's probably why you're unhappy. If you're unhappy as an introvert, it's because you're always looking outside. By looking outside always, you become unconscious of the inside. And by becoming unconscious, that's how each process happens. And you think that you're existing, and you think that you're going to die one day. But by becoming conscious means to introspect, look inside. By looking inside, these emotions and personalizing cannot happen, because the emotional reaction and the personalizing of the experience only happens if you're looking outside. And it only happens if it started unconsciously. Because no one here gets angry and says, oh, I couldn't wait to get angry. I wanted to get angry. Anger happens, and then all of a sudden you're aware of it. And at that point, it's hard to stop. It's like a car with no brakes. But it started because we were not paying attention what's happening inside. That's why the Buddha said that the first step in the 7 steps of awakening is introspection, satipatthana. Sati means attention. Patthana comes from upatthana. Upa means inside, and thana is to place. Place attention inside. If you start doing this, you start seeing your experience, the experience of the body, the experience of feeling, the experience of emotion, the experience of the concepts and thoughts and interpretations. That's how you become conscious of what's happening inside, and that's what leads to the end of all suffering. So yeah, I think a lot of it happens from being unconscious and looking outside instead of looking inside.
In a way, I was just thinking this, phrasing it a certain way, like instead of being self-conscious, be experience conscious, but that would include introspective, because what's going on internally is part of the experience.
Yeah.
All right, well, everyone, thank you for coming.
Thank you.